Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
And my screen is also visible to all of you, right?
Yes, visible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. From today, we are going to start LINQ. It is going to take some time, right? At least uh, 7 to 10 classes it will take. And what I'm planning in this weekend, I'm going to cover one or two important concepts, right? Either Saturday or Sunday. I'm going to discuss solid principles. So you guys just tell me which day is suitable for you guys to attend the class, Saturday or Sunday?
For me, Saturday, sir.
Saturday. Okay. Just ping in the group, right? If more number of students are interested for Saturday, then I will take Saturday to discuss solid principles. Otherwise, if more number of students are interested for Sunday, then I will take the class on Sunday. Not here in that group, Venkatesh.
Yes.
Somsekhar, the Telegram group, please. There only you need to put the
Okay,
message.
sir. Okay.
Yeah. Right. So let us start today's discussion. And for any .NET developer, right? Whether you are working as a C#.NET, VB.NET, or whether you are working with any kind of a .NET applications like console application, Windows Form application, WShape application, MVC application, Web API application, no matter whatever application you are developing, this is one of the mandatory skill you should have, right? The LINQ skill you should have. Otherwise, you will face a lot of difficulty, right, while developing the real-time application. Why it is important? What is the advantages? All those things we are going to discuss in today's session. Okay, let us start discussion by going through the one of the interview question. You can also say what is LINQ, right? The basic concept, let us first discuss in today's session, and then we will gradually will move further to the advanced concept, right? So what is LINQ? So if I will ask this question to you guys, first of all, you are working professional, right? So most of the people are working. So what is your thought about this? What is LINQ? Why we should use LINQ? Any guess from anyone?
Less code, less typing.
Let's
By
go to
using
this.
LINQ, we can write database.
Sorry?
Faster code.
Faster code.
Still, LINQ is morely used with C#.
Okay.
Yeah, it simplified the SQL queries actually.
To simplify SQL queries. Okay. Okay. So basically, whatever answer you guys give me, that is not fully correct, but partially correct. Okay. So basically, what is LINQ? Okay. Let me tell you. So whenever you are developing one application, first of all, you need to identify my application is going to work with what kind of data sources. So whenever I'm saying data sources doesn't mean only database. Data sources doesn't mean only database. Say it might be a database, it might be a XML document, right? It might be some in-memory objects, right? And whenever you are working with database, it might be your SQL Server database, it might be your Oracle database, it might be your MySQL database, etc. Right? So basically, whenever I'm saying data sources, so data sources don't consider that data source means database. Data source means any source, right, which store my data. So if you remember, you can create a XML file on your application where you can store the data. In your database, you can store the data. And if you don't want to store the data in database and XML document, right, in your application, you can create a class, you can create a collection. Inside that collection, you might also store the data. That means data source means the source which can store your data. And in our case, it might be database, XML document, in memory object, anything, right? Suppose you want to work with a database like SQL Server, then what kind of syntaxes you need to know? The syntaxes which is specific to SQL Server, right? The way the suppose you want to fetch the top 5 students, then the fetching the top 5 students from the students table, the syntax is not going to be same in SQL Server, Oracle, and MySQL. The syntax might be vary from database to database. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. So that means if you are working with SQL Server database, then you need to know syntaxes specific to SQL Server. If you want to work with Oracle, then you have to know syntaxes, right, which is specific to Oracle. Similarly, in the case of MySQL, that means if your application connecting with 3 different kind of databases, it also possible that you are developing one application, that application interacting with SQL Server database, also that application interacting with MySQL database. So in that case, as a .NET developer, you need to understand syntax specific to SQL Server in order to work with SQL Server database. Similarly, you also need to understand MySQL syntaxes because you are also going to interact with MySQL database. But sometimes your application also needs to work with some XML document. So then you have to understand what is XPath, what is XCopy, right? The syntax, right, which is specific to XML document. Similarly, if your application stores some data in memory, then you need to understand what is array, what is list, what is collections, what is generic collection, what is non-generic collection, and how to store the data in collection, how to paste the data in from the collection. And those things you need to understand. That means if your data sources are different, then you need to understand different syntaxes, right? The syntax which you are using to paste the data from different databases is going to be different. The syntax is also different in XML document. The syntax is also different in memory object, right? Suppose your application interacting with these 3 different kind of data sources, then you need to understand different syntaxes as you are going to work with the different kind of data sources. It's not a difficult thing for us as a developer. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So I don't know, today SQL Server, tomorrow Oracle. It might be possible after some day some new database will might be come into the picture. Then again I need to learn, and again I need to write the code, right? Suppose you are writing some select star from, or select top to, select phase, right? Limited to, like this you are using some query. Then that query, if database is changed, that query will not work. Yes or no? So to simplify these things, to take all these data sources into a common row, right? What .NET provided? .NET provided LINQ. LINQ means it is a common query syntax. Common query syntax. As a .NET developer, you do not need to write syntax, right? You do not need to write queries specific to SQL Server, or specific to Oracle, or specific to MySQL, or specific to XML document, or any other data sources. You have to write LINQ query. That is a common query syntax which you have to write, and based on the corresponding, or based on the data sources, the query whatever you write, that is going to be converted into specific data source. Suppose you are working with a SQL Server database, right? Whatever query you write, right, that will be converted to SQL Server syntaxes. If you are working with Oracle database, whatever query, the same query, you do not, common means same. You have to write only one syntax, and that syntax, that query, it is going to work with all the different data sources. You do not need to be worried about what is the data source. Whether the data source is SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, XML, or in-memory object, I do not have to be worried. Okay, this is now not my responsibility to understand how it is going to converted and executed in the SQL Server database, or it is going to converted and executed in Oracle and MySQL, or how it is going to interact with the XML document. Now that is not my responsibility. I'm using the LINQ query which is provided by .NET Framework. Now it is the responsibility of LINQ provider Right now, it is the responsibility of a LINQ provider who will take care everything. I'm writing the query using LINQ. LINQ provider will take my LINQ queries and then he will check what is the corresponding data source. Corresponding data source is XML document. Okay, let me convert that to some format which can XML understand. Okay, corresponding database is Oracle. Okay, let me convert this query to Oracle specific syntax so that the Oracle database can understand. And this is how LINQ simplifies our job. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Clear.
Right. Okay, this is the basic things. Let us try to understand what is this. The term LINQ, it stands for Language Integrated Query, and it is pronounced as LINQ. Nowadays, use of a LINQ is increasing rapidly. So as a developer, you should understand LINQ and its architecture. The LINQ is a part of language, but not it is a complete language. So it is a part of language, but it is not a complete language. Don't think that LINQ means language integrated query means it's a language. It is not a language. It is just part of a language. It is a part of C#.NET language or VB.NET language, right? It was introduced with .NET Framework 3.5, right? Before 3.5, LINQ concept is not there, and C# 3.0. So guys, you have to remember .NET Framework .NET Framework and C# both are two different things. Don't consider that .NET Framework 3.5 means it is C# 3.5. Both are different things, right? .NET Framework 3.5 and C# 3.0, and the concept LINQ, right? Whatever query we are going to write using LINQ, all these things are available under one namespace called system.link. LINQ provide us with common query syntax, which allows us to query the data from various data sources in uniform manner. What it means? It means using a single LINQ query, we can get or set the data from various data sources such as SQL Server database, XML document, IDEO.NET data source, any other in-memory object such as a collection, generic, etc. See, so if you are using LINQ, it provides a common query syntax, right? And using that common query syntax, we can write the query, right, to get or set the data from different data sources, right? And the query, whatever I'm going to write or whatever we are going to write, it is going to common for all the different data sources. And based on the data sources, that query is going to be converted into appropriate type. Right, so you can see using LINQ, you can work with in-memory objects such as a collection, generic. You can work with data set, entity framework, SQL Server database, XML document, any other data sources. No matter, you can work with LINQ. Clear? Whatever I have explained, this is the definition. So why should we use LINQ? Let us understand with an example, right? Let us understand why we should use LINQ. Suppose we are developing a .NET application, and that application requires data from different data sources. For example, the application needs data from SQL Server database. So as a developer, in order to access data from SQL Server database, we need to understand IDEO.NET and SQL Server specific syntaxes. If the database is Oracle, then we need to learn SQL syntaxes specific to Oracle database. And in the same way, if the database is MySQL, then as a developer, we need to understand how MySQL syntaxes are work and how MySQL syntaxes are created, right? So we need to understand different syntaxes specific to different databases along with the IDEO.NET, right? If the application needs data from an XML document, then as a developer, in order to work with the XML document, we need to understand XPath and XSLT. Right? What is XML? How to work with XML? That we will discuss in our coming sessions, but not now. But behind the scene, if you XML document, XML is also a data source, and if you want to work with the XML, right, then you need to understand what is XPath and what is XSLT. Similarly, if the application needs to manipulate the data in memory, right? Suppose you are having list of student, list of customer, list of product, right? Then as a developer, we also need to understand how to work with in-memory object, right? That means if, suppose your .NET application needs data from different data sources, then in order to work with different data sources, we need to understand the syntaxes specific to each data source, how we can manipulate the how we can manipulate the data sets. Manipulate means how we can get the data from the data source and how we can set the data from a into a data source. All these things we need to understand. But LINQ provides a uniform programming model, which is nothing but your common query syntax, which allows us to work with different data sources, but using a standard, or you can say uniform coding style, right? Now, if you are using LINQ, then you need not to be worry about different syntaxes, right? You need to use a common query syntax or a specific standard, you can say, a unique coding style, and using that common query syntax or using that uniform coding standard, right? You can work with any kind of a data sources using LINQ. So, and if we are using LINQ, then what is the result? As a result, we do not need to learn different syntaxes which are specific to different data sources, right? So now, if I'm going to use LINQ in my application, then as a developer, I do not need to learn different syntaxes which are specific to different data sources. Now let us see how the LINQ works. So we understand that is LINQ will simplify this job of a developer. We understand the LINQ work with different data sources using a common query syntax or using a unique coding style. We can work with different data sources. But how it is possible? How exactly the LINQ work internally in .NET framework? Let us try to understand. First of all, you understand this thing. What is LINQ? Clear, guys? Or any question?
Yes, clear.
Clear.
So how does the LINQ work? Okay, just have a look at this diagram. Let me increase the size of this diagram. See, you can develop .NET application using any .NET supported language like C#, .NET, VB, .NET, F#, .NET, J#, .NET, right? Any .NET supported language you can use to develop any kind of a .NET applications, right? Here you can develop a console application, Windows Form application, MVC application, I mean web application. You can also develop web API application. You can develop WShape services, right? So any application you develop, then in your application, you can use LINQ queries, and using the LINQ queries, you can communicate with different data sources. You can communicate with different data sources. But how? But if you look at the diagram, so in between your LINQ query and the different data sources, there is our hero, Mr. LINQ provider is there. This LINQ provider is actually the hero of our LINQ. This LINQ provider is an invisible element, right? Invisible element means it is not going to be visible in your application. You will write LINQ query, you can see the LINQ query, you can see the data source. But this Mr. Invisible hero, what he will do, he will take the LINQ query and he will convert the LINQ query to the appropriate data sources. And inside this LINQ provider, we have a different kind of a LINQ provider, right? And you know this is the LINQ query, and you know that my LINQ query is going to work with the entity framework. Then there is a LINQ provider that is called a LINQ to entities who will come into the picture, and that LINQ to entities query will take the LINQ query and will convert that LINQ query to specific format so that the entity framework can understand. Now, suppose you know that my LINQ query is going to interact with the SQL Server database. Then what we'll do? This LINQ to SQL provider will come into the picture, and he will take the LINQ query, whatever query you have written, and that query he will convert to SQL Server specific syntaxes so that the SQL Server database can understand and execute the query. Right? Suppose you are working with ADO.NET dataset and you are using dataset to perform the operations, right? And this LINQ query, what he will do, we have written the query. Then this LINQ to dataset provider will come into the picture, take the LINQ query, convert the LINQ query into a format so that understanding underlying data source, right? ADO.NET dataset can understand the things, right? That means if we are working with different data sources, then different data providers are there, and that data provider will actually take the LINQ query and convert that LINQ query into a specific format so that the underlying data source can understand. Clear, guys, how exactly the LINQ works?
Yes.
Yes.
Clear.
And this will lies in between your LINQ query and the actual data sources, right? So you can see the LINQ provider is a software component that lies between the LINQ queries and the actual data sources. The LINQ provider will convert the LINQ queries into a format that can be understood by the underlying data source. For example, LINQ to SQL provider, LINQ to SQL provider will convert the LINQ query to SQL statement, which can be understood by the SQL Server database. Similarly, LINQ to SQL provider will convert the queries into a format that can be understood by the XML document. Clear, guys, how exactly the LINQ works?
Yes.
Yeah. So, before proceeding further, and one more thing, as you know, whenever a product comes into the market, so definitely there is some advantages. Along with the advantages, also there are some disadvantages. Now let us try to understand what are the advantages of using LINQ and what are the disadvantages of using LINQ, right? See, what are the advantages, right? Suppose you are going to use LINQ, then it might be possible that someone asks why I'm going to use LINQ. I can also write the query, but you have to give that example, right? What example? Suppose I'm using LINQ and suppose my application work with the different data sources. Then as a developer, it's very difficult for me to understand the syntaxes specific to each data source, right? That is going to take some time. That it means the productivity is going to be less. No matter, I can develop the application by knowing the syntaxes specific to the database, but that will take some time. But if I'm going with a LINQ, then that learning page, that learning different syntaxes, that will be reduced, right? By using LINQ, I can write a query and the future. Suppose today I'm using SQL Server database. Tomorrow that SQL Server migrated to MySQL database. Then in my application code, there is no change because I have not written any code, any syntax specific to SQL Server. I have written the common query syntax, that is LINQ syntax. So no matter the data sources, if today SQL Server, tomorrow MySQL, no matter, my application code is going to be remain same. And this is the biggest advantages of using LINQ, right? We do not need to learn. Okay, let us understand the advantages, right? We do not need to learn new query language syntaxes for different data sources, as it provides common query syntax to query different data sources, right? Less code as compared to traditional approach. That means using LINQ, we can minimize our application code. It provides compile time error checking as well as intelligent support in Visual Studio, right? How it is providing compile time error checking, intelligent support. Once you start programming, you will understand this. And once you are getting the compile time error checking and intelligent support, that means helps of to avoid runtime error, right? LINQ provides a lot of inbuilt methods, right? Actually, we are learning a LINQ means we are going to learn we are going to learn 50 or 100 methods, right? How each method work, what is the role and responsibility of each method. That is what we are going to learn. That means LINQ provide a lot of inbuilt methods that we can use to perform different operations, right? So different operation means what, right? As we are going to interact with the data source, right? Whatever operation, most of whatever operation means, I can say all the operation what you perform on a database, but most of the operations what you can perform the database, most of the SQL operation. I'm not talking about PL/SQL. I'm talking about SQL, right? In SQL, you can group the data, you can filter the data, you can sort the data, right? So those kind of operations you can also perform using a LINQ. Its query can be reused. That means once you create a query, that query can be used again and again. Once you start programming, then I will show these things practically, right? How you are going to filter the data, how you are going to sort the data in ascending and descending order, how you can use multiple, how you can use multiple columns to sort the data. Even you can also going to perform the joining, right? How you can perform the join between two tables, between three tables, between four tables, right? All these things we are going to discuss, right? Okay, so aggregation also possible. Aggregation means suppose your database contain 10 columns and there are salary column is there. You want to find the total salary of all employees. You want to find the average salary, max salary, mean salary, right? So everything is possible using LINQ, and those things we are going to discuss in detail by taking some real-time examples. So these are the advantages of using LINQ. So then what is the disadvantages? Using a LINQ, it is very difficult to write complex queries, right? See, in SQL, you can write complex query very easily. You can create a function or storage procedure, and as part of that function or storage procedure, you can create you can join 2 table, 4 table, 5 table. You can apply some kind of a filter on each table, right? Whatever result, again you can filter the result, right? You can sort the order of the result, right? Those kind of a complex queries. I'm not saying it is not possible. I'm saying it is possible to write complex queries, but it will be very difficult for us to understand the queries. But if you understand the basic concept, then you can easily write the complex queries. LINQ does not take the full advantages of SQL feature like case execution plan, right? So if you remember, if you are working with SQL Server database, once you create a storage procedure, right, then once you execute the storage procedure, the storage procedure is compiled, the execution plan is created, the execution plan is stored in the cache memory. And next time, whenever you are calling the storage procedure for execution, directly it will take the cache plan and execute the storage procedure. These things is not available in LINQ, right? Every time you are creating a LINQ query, writing the LINQ query, that LINQ query will convert to SQL syntaxes, right? That SQL syntax that SQL syntax will be compiled, will be check for will check whether syntactically it is correct or not. Then it will generate the execution plan. Then it is going to execute that SQL query in the database, right? We will get worst performance if we do not write the query properly, right? I see in many of my colleagues and many of my, even my senior and my junior, they are writing the LINQ query in a way that will degrade the application performance. For example, you are performing a joining operation, and you are performing the you created one collection in your application, and there is a table in the database, right? One table in the database and one collection in your application, and you are trying to join this collection with the database table, right? And if you are writing the query in this manner, then it will kill your application performance, right? So how that practically I will show you, right? That means if you are not writing the query in a proper manner, then it will kill your application performance, right? And one of the thing is that, suppose if you see, if you are creating some if you are having one storage procedure and you deployed your application to the server, and you need some changes in the storage procedure, then you can go to your database and you can change that storage procedure. For that, you do not need to deploy the application to the server again and again. But if you are writing the LINQ query and if you want to do some kind of changes, then again you need to change the query in your LINQ, right? Changing the LINQ query means you need to recompile the application and you need to redeploy the application DLL to the server. And this is one of the disadvantages of using LINQ. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So these are the advantages and the disadvantages of using a LINQ. So we have discussed some of the basic theoretical concept, right? Now let us move further and try to understand how we can write LINQ queries in .NET. Right. So before writing LINQ queries, we need to understand a few things, few terms. Right? What are the terms you need to understand to write a LINQ query? So basically, you need to understand what is data source. Data source means it might be your in-memory object, might be your SQL Server database, might be your Oracle database or MySQL database, XML document, ADO.NET datasets, and etc. Right? That means the source which stored the data is nothing but your data source. So in order to work with the LINQ query, we need to understand, first of all, we should have a data source. Once we have the data source, then we can prepare the query using a LINQ. Once we prepare the query using a LINQ, then we need to execute the query. For example, suppose you are having a database, right? Suppose this is my database. So this is nothing but your data source. Once you have the data source, then you need to prepare the LINQ query. So you need to write the syntax select star from students, right? So this is nothing but your query. But only query is not enough. Once you prepare the query, you need to execute the query. That is nothing but your query execution, right? Currently, we do not have any data, but this is nothing but your query execution. So what you need in order to work with LINQ, you have a data source. You need to prepare the query using LINQ, and then you need to execute the query. So these are the three things that we need to understand, right? So what is a query? And here our main our main focus is on query. Executing the query is very is simple. Data source, you should have a data source. Once you have a data source, then you need to prepare the query. So what is query? A query is nothing but a set of instructions that are applied to a data source, right? Suppose we are having a data source, then we need to apply a set of instruction to that data source. What instruction? Not to perform the CRUD operations, right? Suppose you are having a SQL server. SQL server is a database, and on that SQL server database, there is a table called student. On the table student, I need to write some instruction, right? So that it is going to perform the update operation on the SQL Server student database table. I need to write some instruction, right? And that instruction, or I need to prepare a query. That query should execute on the SQL Server database to fetch the top 5 students, right? That means a query is nothing but it's a set of instruction, and that instruction is going to perform the database CRUD operation on the database, right? And also, right, not only execute the query in the database, and also it will tell the shape of the output from that query. Suppose in this case, if I'm executing this query, and this is the query which is going to execute on the database, but this query will also tell the shape of the output. Shape of the output means what are the column you retrieved from the database. It might be possible that inside this database there are 100 columns. Out of 100 column, I want to retrieve only 4 columns, or I want to retrieve another column which can combine the data of a 2 column, right? What it means, it means what is the output, what is the shape of the data, what is the format, okay, what are the column you want to retrieve, in what format you want to retrieve the data, that shape it is also going to retrieve. Data is a different thing, but the output shape, the shape of the output is a different thing, right? So the LINQ query, basically it's a set of instruction that will be applied on the data source, and that query is going to basically perform the CRUD operation. That query also tells the shape of the output from the query. So what it means? That means the query is not responsible for what will be the output, rather it is responsible for the shape of the output. How many records are going to return? The query is not responsible. The query is responsible if the record return, then the record will return in what format, what are the column, right? What are the column name? That is the query is responsible. It might be possible that it might be written 1 record, 2 record, 10 record. That is not the main objective of query. The main objective of query is if you are returning some data, then in what format it is going to return the data, right? So each query is a combination of 3 things, right? So if you want to prepare a query, then that query is going to be the combination of 3 things. What are the 3? Initialization. Initialization means you have to specify the data source. To work with a particular data source, in which data source I'm going to execute my query. That data source. Second is the condition, right? Condition means you want to apply some where condition, you want to filter the data, you want to sort the data, you want to join 2 tables, you want to perform some aggregation, right? So in any condition you want to apply on the data source, that you can apply. And selection means what? Now once you have the data source, once you provide a condition, right, in this case the table contain 10 records, and you apply that it's a student table, and that student's table contain 10 records, and there is a column called gender, and the condition is that I want to filter the students whose gender is male, and the student table contain 10 columns. Out of 10 column, I want only 3 columns data. So in that case, in the selection page, you need to provide the selection. What are the column you want to retrieve? You want to retrieve 2 columns, 3 columns, right? That is what you need to provide. Along with that, if you want to provide some grouping selection or joining selection, single selection. What is single selection, grouping selection, joining? Everything I'm going to discuss practically, right? So basically, if you want to prepare one, what I can say, if you want to prepare a query, you need to understand 3 things. What is initialization, condition, and selection. So once I will give you the example, then you will get a better clarity regarding this, right? So what are the different ways to write a query? See, in the LINQ, you can use query syntax, which is very much similar to your SQL syntax. You can also write method syntax. Method syntax means you will use some method to perform the LINQ query, and it is also possible to use LINQ mixed syntax. Mixed syntax means it is the combination of query syntax plus method syntax. So both you can also combine together to form your LINQ query. But from the performance point of view, there is no difference between the above three approaches. Whether you use query syntax or method syntax or mixed syntax, the performance will not be varied. It is going to give you the same performance. Then which one to use, it will totally depends on your personal preference, right? For me, for simple queries, I always go with method syntax, and for complex queries, I always go with the query syntax. But you can write the simple and complex queries using method syntax, simple and complex queries using query syntax, right? And going further, right, whatever example I'm going to show, I will show you every example using both query syntax and method syntax, so that you can easily understand these both approaches, and whichever approach you like the most, right, that approach you can use in your application, right? So let us first understand the LINQ query syntax, right? So LINQ query syntax, right? And as I mentioned, if you are having complex query, you can write the query syntax. Why? Because it's easier to use, right? So LINQ query syntax is one of the easiest ways to write LINQ queries. The syntax for this type of query is very much similar to the SQL query syntax, right? So what it means if you know SQL syntaxes, right, then you can easily understand this thing. If you are familiar with the SQL queries, then it is going to be very easy for you to write LINQ queries using this query syntax. Let us understand the syntax, right? So suppose you are having one data source. Data source means you are having a student's table. So context dot student you can write here, or you are having a collection student list that you have to write here. From object in data source. So what it means now, for each object in the data source, right? So from object in data source, you have to read these things like this. For each object in the data source, that data source might be your suppose you are using entity framework context dot students, right? Suppose you are using in-memory object like a list collection, list of students, and you are giving that name as a list student, then you have to provide a list student here. Then what it means, for each object in the data source, that means I'm going to apply filter, right? I'm going to work with all the data that is stored inside this data source. Where condition, you know what means, I want to apply some kind of filtering. I want to apply gender equals to male. So you have to write from object in context dot student, where, right, object dot gender equals to male, and select object. Object means this object will specify whatever the data, right, in this case, that will be written by this object, right? So this is nothing but your selection. Object means it's a variable, right? And this variable will contain the structure, right? Content C. In this case, if you are writing context dot students, right? What is the student structure? How many properties are there? That will be same as this, that all the properties will be stored inside this object. So that means I'm returning the original form of the data. So I'm writing here. But I don't want that original form of the data. I want only 2 column or 3 column. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible. How? Here you need to create an anonymous object. And within that anonymous object, you need to specify only the properties which you want to retrieve. That's what we are going to discuss later, right? So basically, if you are working with LINQ query syntax, you have to initialize the data source, you have to provide the condition, and you have to select the data, whatever you want to return. So this select object will form the shape of the output, right? Whether you want the original data or you want a different form of the output, that what you need to specify using this select column, right? So this is one of the way to write LINQ query. And the other way is using LINQ method syntax, right? LINQ method syntax means it is something similar to method chaining, right? Something similar to method chaining. So how? See, you have to write the data source. This is nothing but your initialization. Condition method. Condition method means you have to provide the condition, and selection method, you have to provide the selection, right? How? Suppose your data set is a context dot students dot where you have to provide the lambda expression std such that std dot gender equals to male dot select or you can write dot to list, right? If you write the to list, then it is going to return the original form of the data. If you want to provide a different form, then you have to use dot select, and within that select method, you need to create an anonymous object, and you need to form the object how, what are the column, or how, if you want to create if you want to provide different name to the column, then that is also possible. That is how you can select the data. So this is the syntax. Practically, I will show you everything, right? So, and coming to the LINQ mixed syntax, so it is the combination of query syntax and you can say method syntax. So you can see from object in data source where condition select object, and I have put these things together within a bracket, right? And this is nothing but, this part is nothing but your query syntax, and then dot method, right? Dot method means here I'm selecting all the students whose gender is male. But then I decided I only want to take 2 students, right? Out of this, suppose there are 5 students in the database whose gender is male. Out of this 5 students, I want to fetch only the top 2 students, right? Then you have to write the method here dot take, and you have to provide the value too. So in that case, out of this 5 students, it is only going to take the top 2 students. So in that case, it is the combination of query syntax and method syntax. So even it is also possible to write take functionality within the query method. That means everything is possible. You can write everything using query syntax. You can write everything using method syntax. It is also possible to mix both query syntax and method syntax. Clear, guys? Right? This is the syntax. Now it's time to understand these things practically, right? Let me copy the code, go to my Visual Studio, copy paste it. See, this is my data source, right? So this is my data source means, give me 1 minute, guys. So guys, today is a introduction class. Everything I'm going to discuss in detail from tomorrow. I'm just going to show you how exactly LINQ work, right? So no need to explain what is this. This is a collection of which type? Integer collection. So as it is an integer collection, it is going to store the integer number 1, 2. I'm storing the integer number 1 to 12, right? And then this is the data source. As if you remember, to work with LINQ, you need 3 things. One is data source, query, and execution. So this is nothing but your step 1, data source is ready. What is step 2? Step 2 is query. And to write a query, how many things you need? You need 3 things, right? Let me show you. So the 3 things. So this is the LINQ query from obj in integer list. So instead of obj, you can give any name from number, right? From number in integer list, right? And then once you provide this number, what it means, it's a kind of a for each loop. If you remember, for each loop, right? For each loop, so inside this integer list, I'm providing this. And what is this norm here? So in this case, this norm will access all the element from this collection or not, one by one? Yes or no?
Yes.
Right. Similarly, whatever the elements store inside this collection, you can access these elements by using this number variable now. So this number, it is nothing but your, you can say for each number inside this collection, right? Whatever elements, you can not access that directly within here, right? So directly I cannot access the value, or if it's a content some data, I cannot access directly. In here, I'm creating a variable which can access the element from the collection. Same thing here. So this is nothing but your variable which can access the element from here, right? So once you access, what is your condition? This norm is going to access the element from this collection, right? Then you have to provide a condition that element what I'm accessing is greater than 5. If it is greater than 5, then select that element, right? So this is nothing but your data source. This is nothing but your condition, and this is nothing but your selection, right? What is where, what is select, we are going to discuss in detail, right? But for now, I'm just giving you the basic syntax, right? So in this case, so for each element, for each number in the collection, please fetch okay, so this number variable will access all the element inside this collection. And what is my condition? I want to fetch the number which is greater than 5. And once you fetch the number, then please select the number. So in this case, it is going to return the data, the original form of the data. I'm not going to change anything because it's just a primitive type collection, right? If it's a complex type collection, then what will happen? In a complex type collection, there might be multiple columns. If a multiple column is there, then you can format the output. But in this case, it's a simple number. I do not need to format the output. I need to return the number as it is, right? So in this case, it is going to generate the query, right? Once the query is generated, right, that is nothing but query syntax. So it's not the, so in this case, this query syntax is not going to store the number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is not going to store the number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When you access the element, right, whenever you use this for each loop, or if you use the toList method or something like this, whenever you are accessing the element from the query syntax, right, that means at this point of time, that query is going to be executed and the element will be written, right? This is nothing but your execution. So in this case, you can see whatever element stored, right, that is going to be print, right, in this variable. So in this case, the elements value 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 will be print in the console. So this is how you need to form the LINQ query. You have to initialize the data source. You have to provide your condition if required. Then you have to provide the number, right? Now let me run the application and show you the output. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now what I'm trying to do, I'm just commenting these things. See, so as you know, condition is optional, right? Suppose I'm creating one LINQ query, select star from student where gender equals to male. Only male employees will only male student will return in the output. If I'm removing that where condition, then what will happen? All the element will be written. So in this case, I'm removing the where condition, so all the element will be written, and that is what you can see in the console window. So this is how you need to work with LINQ query syntax. Now, any question from anyone?
No.
Okay. So next one is LINQ method syntax. So LINQ method syntax means we need to understand, we need to write the query using methods only, right? Let me show you how. So this is my integer list, right? This is my data source. And if you remember the data source, so this is data source, condition, and selection, right? This is my data source. This is my condition, right? So here you can also write like any name. If you are confusing with num, then you can give num, right? This is my data source, contains 10 elements. This is my condition. I'm providing the condition using lambda expression. I'm not going to explain what is lambda expression. You know already what is lambda expression. So here here what I'm doing, I'm fetching the element from this collection where the element value is greater than 5. This is my condition. And this toList means it is nothing but your selection. So once you execute this toList, then it will return you the data, right? Whatever the data, whatever the element, right, satisfy this condition, right? And then you can see the element here by executing, right? If you do not use this execution, then this syntax is this data is it is not going to be used, right? If you are not accessing the element, then what is the use of the syntax, right? So you are accessing this for you are accessing the element for the purpose of execution, right? And that is what I'm here I'm simply printing the value, right? So in this case, if you run the application, then you will also get the same output, right? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We know what is this toList method. So it's a method which will convert the output to toList format, right? And if you go to this where method, then you will see that it is an extension method, right? So this dot IEnumerable of T shows. So what is so if you see anything, right, where a method is implemented by using this operator and IEnumerable T source of source, then what is it means? It means it is a extension method, and you can access this extension method on IEnumerable of T source, right? What is extension method? That is what we have already discussed. But again, in our next session, right, tomorrow, I'm going to discuss, I'm going to have a brief idea about what are exactly extension method, how all the method in a LINQ are implemented as extension method, right? All these things we will discuss again tomorrow, right? So here you can see it is the data source. This is nothing but your where condition, and this is nothing but your selection. So query is formed with three statements. One is data source, condition, and a collection. And here I'm just I'm only accessing the elements. Any question from anyone? Okay.
No.
Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to use both method syntax and the query syntax, right? That is nothing but your mixed syntax. So mixed syntax means, this is nothing but your query syntax. So my requirement is I want to okay, first of all, I need to fetch all the elements which is greater than 5, but I don't want those elements. Rather, I want the sum of those elements. In this case, how many elements are there which is greater than 5? These 5 elements. I want to sum all these elements, whatever the result that I want to print on the console. So for that purpose, I'm going with mixed syntax. So here you can see this is my query syntax and this is my method syntax, right? And if you go to this definition of the sum method, then you will also see that this is also an extension method. This means it is an extension method and it is going to return me one integer value. Why? Because currently it is working on integer data type, right? So once and this is the combination of both mixed syntax and combination of both the query syntax and the method syntax. Once you run the application, then it will print you the result as expected. Right, sum is 40. If you calculate this 7, 6, 13, 8, 21, 9, 30 plus 10 equals to 40. Clear, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So today is just the introduction class, right? Everything we are going to discuss in detail, right? So this is how you need to write the query using LINQ, method syntax and query syntax. But believe me, guys, there are more than 100 methods are available, and each and every method we are going to learn as part of this, right? So one important thing you need to understand while working with LINQ, or you can say it is one of the most frequently asked interview question. What is the difference between IEnumerable and IQueryable in C#? And if I'm not wrong, while I'm explaining the OOPS concept, at that time someone asked me this question: Sir, what is IEnumerable and what is IQueryable, and what is the difference between them? When to use IEnumerable and when to use IQueryable? And at that time, I have told that I will explain this concept while I will explain the LINQ. So it's time to understand what is this IEnumerable and IQueryable, right? So this is our example, right? This is our example. Okay, let me increase the size. If you mouse over this this query syntax variable, then you will see that the type of this variable is IEnumerable of int. What is the type of this variable? IEnumerable of int. Okay. So instead of integer, I can also write IEnumerable of int. And it is going to work as expected. Now run the application and see the output. It is working as fine. So we are getting the output as expected. So what is IEnumerable? If you go to the definition, then you will see that, right? It's a collection. It's a generic collection. And this generic collection is inherited from the IEnumerable non-generic collection, right? That means this is the main collection class, which is IEnumerable. And from this IEnumerable non-generic class, this IEnumerable of T collection class is inherited. Further, if you see this IEnumerable of T class, what is its definition said? Expose the enumerator which supports a simple iteration over a collection of specified type. What type you specify here? You need to specify the type. What type we have specified here? We have specified the type as integer. right? So expose the enumerator which supports a simple iteration over a specified type. So in this case, integer. So in this collection, which is a integer collection, it provides a simple iteration over the element. So how it is possible? This is possible because of the get enumerator method. Because of this get enumerator method, right? So we are able to access the element. So this is nothing but your iteration. Iteration means what? Accessing the elements using a loop is nothing but your iteration. And I'm able to access the element, right? I'm able to access the element of this collection only because of the IEnumerable and only because of this get enumerator. If your collection class, any collection class you take into consideration, you will see that each and every collection class having this get enumerator method, and this get enumerator method provides the flexibility, or this get enumerator method actually supports the iteration over the collection element over the collection. So in this case, this IEnumerable of int or IEnumerable of t, it is nothing but an interface, right? And this interface provides the support to iterate over the collection of the specified type. In this case, what is the type? Integer. So in this case means in using this query syntax variable, you can iterate over the element using an integer variable. Now, if you take the mouse pointer over this item, then you will see that var is replaced with integer. So you can also write an integer here, and there is no issue. So you can also write like this. So that is what you need to remember. IEnumerable is nothing but what? Now it is an interface which provides the supports for iteration over the element of the collection, right? So whatever elements available inside this query syntax, you can iterate over all the element, and this is possible because of IEnumerable of t. And if you go to the definition, then you will see that this IEnumerable of t provides this get enumerator method. And when to use this IEnumerable of t means whenever you are working with in-memory objects. If you are working with in-memory object, then you need to work, right? Whenever you are working with the in-memory objects, right, then you need to use this IEnumerable of t. Why? The reason I will show you after some time. Why I need to use IEnumerable of t whenever I'm working with the in-memory object. So integer list, this is an in-memory object. Why it is mandatory to work with the IEnumerable of t when you are working with in-memory object? That is the reason I will show you after some time. But for now, if someone asks you what is IEnumerable, then you need to tell that IEnumerable is an interface, right? And this interface is implemented in the system.collections.generic namespace. So it's a generic interface. Its non-generic version is also available. From that non-generic version, right, you can see this non-generic version. So from that non-generic version, this generic version is inherited, right? So if you remember, we are also having some non-generic collections, right? Array list is a non-generic collection. Stack is a non-generic collection. Queue is a non-generic collection. So if you are creating an array list, right? Okay, so okay, let me give you that example. Array list. So for that array list to work, what we need to use? We need to use the non-generic collections, right? So array list equals to new array list, and to this list, what I'm trying to do, I'm adding some elements. I'm adding 100, I'm adding 200, like this, right? I'm adding this element, and even this on this collection, even I can also use this for each loop, right? And I can access the element. I can access the element, and I can print the data like this. Right? This is also possible. Why it is possible? Because if you go to the array list collection, then you will see that array list is a collection which is inherited from where? It is inherited from IEnumerable. And if you go to the IEnumerable, then you will see that it is having the get enumerator method. So instead of creating the variable of array list, can I create a variable like this? Yes, that is also possible. But in this case, this array list, this IEnumerable doesn't provide any method. So here you need to create the array list collection like this, right? And later, if you want okay, so IEnumerable equals to this is possible, right? Now you can access the element also like this, because it is the parent class and it is the child class. A parent class reference variable can hold the child class object, right? And we are able to access this using a loop only because of this IEnumerable. So how IEnumerable? Because if you go to the definition of array list class, it is inherited from the IEnumerable interface, and if you go to the IEnumerable interface, so it is having the get enumerator method. Right now if you go to the list class, right, if you go to the list class, then you will see that it is inherited from both IEnumerable and enumerable of T. So directly you can access this list using a for each loop, right? So now if you want, then you can also directly access this integer list here, no issue, because this list class implementing the IEnumerable. And here that here whatever result it is returning, that is returning an IEnumerable. So that is also possible. We can use a for each loop. So any class which is inherited from IEnumerable of T or IEnumerable, we can use a for each loop to access the element, or you can iterate over the element of that collection. Clear, guys?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Right? So that is fine. So we have understand this is IEnumerable. Then what is, right? Then what is example? Okay, let us understand the one example so that you can easily understand these things. Right? So you can say this is my student list collection, right? I'm gradually moving from simple to little more complex example, and at the end of LINQ you will write very complex queries using joining 2 tables, 3 tables, 5 tables like this, right? So this is my student list collection. My requirement is to fetch all the students where gender is male. So how to write the query? From std in student list, std.gender equals to male, and I'm selecting the std. Std means I'm selecting the original form of the data, right? So if you want to iterate, then you can use a for each loop to iterate over the element, and you can print the ID and the name. So this is, and in this case, I'm returning the data and I'm storing the data over a collection of IEnumerable type. Now run the application and see the output. ID, name, that is fine, and we are getting the data as expected, right? So this is how IEnumerable is work. Now the question comes to, so we understand this, then what is IQueryable? Okay, so what is IQueryable? So IQueryable means, if you go to the definition, okay, let me first introduce. Okay, so if you go to the definition of IQueryable, then you will see that this IQueryable is actually inherited from the IEnumerable. That means what? If you are having a variable, if you are creating a query using IQueryable, then you can also store that inside IEnumerable, because for IEnumerable is the parent class, and we know a parent class reference variable can hold the child class object reference. So a value of IQueryable you can store inside the value of inside a variable of IEnumerable. Then what is the use of IQueryable? So if you expand this IQueryable, it is having some properties. What are the properties? Expression, element type, and iQuery provider. You have to consider this iQuery provider. If you go to the definition of iQuery provider, then you can see here we are having some method, create query, execute method, and all these things. There's create query and execute method. What is this iQuery provider? This iQuery provider is actually a provider which is nothing but your LINQ provider, right? Suppose you are creating a query right? And you want to execute that query in the SQL Server database, or you want to execute that query in the MySQL database, or you want to execute that query in the XML document, right? Then the LINQ provider, this iQuery provider will come into the picture, and internally iQuery provider will come into the picture, and internally it will create the query and execute the query in the database, right? That means this is what this iQuery provider means, right? So I will show you practically what is the use, right? Let's see the definition. First of all, you can see iQueryable is an interface, and it is available in system.linq namespace. The iQueryable interface is a child of IEnumerable interface. So we can store iQueryable variable in a type of IEnumerable, because IEnumerable is the parent class, and the basic or the thumb rule is that a parent class reference variable can hold the child class object reference. So if you are a variable, or if you create an object of IEnumerable type, then you can store that object inside a variable of IEnumerable type. iQueryable interface has a property called provider, which is of type iQuery provider interface. And if you go to the definition of iQuery provider, then you will see that this method provides the method provided by iQuery provider are used to create LINQ provider, right? LINQ provider means this method, right? Create query execute. So internally LINQ uses this create query and execute method, right? Suppose for example, if you are working with LINQ to SQL, then this iQuery provider will create LINQ to SQL provider, and it will create the query which is going to be understood by the SQL database and execute that query. Again, if you are working with in-memory object or entity framework, then the LINQ to entity query provider, it will create LINQ to entity query provider, or you can say it is going to create queries which can be executed understood by entity framework and execute that query. So basically, whenever you are working with the data sources, right, outer data sources, not in-memory object. But see, if you are working with in-memory object, then this LINQ provider is not required, right? But if you are working with some different data sources like SQL Server, like Oracle, like entity framework, if you are using entity framework, then this iQuery provider will come into the picture, right? And that query provider will create the LINQ query based on the corresponding data source and execute that query, right? So basically, like the IEnumerable, it is also an interface which is inherited from IEnumerable. It provides iQuery provider. That iQuery provider will basically use to create your LINQ query, right, based on the corresponding data source. If the data source is a SQL Server, it will create the query which is going to be understood by the SQL Server. Who is going to create the query? This create query method, and then it will execute the query. Clear, guys?
Okay.
Okay. So let me show you the example, so that and there is no difference. Okay, and there is no difference in the execution part. Everything is going to be same. But the thing is that if you want, okay, let me store. Okay, let me remove these things, right? Okay, let me remove these things. So currently, I'm going to get one error. Why I'm getting an error? Because in this case it is returning IEnumerable. By default it is returning IEnumerable. IEnumerable you cannot store inside a child. See, this is IEnumerable means it's the parent object. You cannot store parent object inside a child object. Child object you can store inside a parent, but parent object you cannot store inside a child object. So between IEnumerable and iQueryable, right? So IEnumerable, this is the parent. IEnumerable is the parent, and this iQueryable, it is the child, right? And this is the child. So by default, this syntax, right, whatever I'm writing here, it is going to return IEnumerable, means parent. Can I store parent or reference variable inside a child object? Is that possible? No, this
No.
is not possible. But if it is returning iQueryable, then I can store that inside IEnumerable, because parent can hold the child object reference, right? So basically what it means. So basically, if you want to prepare some query, right? If you want to prepare some query which you want to store inside iQueryable, then you have to use right? After the data source, you have to use as queryable, right? So once you use this as queryable method, right, then it will convert that query to one object of IQueryable. And once you convert that object to IQueryable, then you can store that inside IQueryable. Now you are not going to get any error, and now you can run the application and you will get the data as expected, right? So now run the application. You are getting the data as expected. Now, even though instead of IQueryable, you can store inside IEnumerable, and this is also possible. Why? It is going to return IQueryable, right? It is going to return IQueryable, but that IQueryable you can store inside IEnumerable. Why? Because IQueryable is a child of a parent. A parent class reference variable can hold the child object reference. See, here it is returning IQueryable of students. Right, this IQueryable of student you can store inside IEnumerable of student, because it is the parent and this is the child, and this time also you will get the output as expected, right? So that is fine. So you can say IEnumerable is also an interface, like the IQueryable is also one interface, and this interface is inherited from IEnumerable interface, right? So and the question is that what is the difference between this IQueryable and IEnumerable, right? So that is the thing that we need to understand next. First of all, you understand what is IQueryable and IEnumerable.
Yeah.
So once you understand the difference, then you will get a better clarity. So what is the difference, right? Both are basically used to form a LINQ query, and when you both are going to form a LINQ query only, right? And you can store that LINQ query. If you want to form a IQueryable, then you have to use as queryable method. Once you use as queryable, then it will form that query as queryable, and you can store that query either in a IEnumerable variable type or IQueryable variable type. But if you are not using as queryable, then it is by default going to be IEnumerable. And in the case of IEnumerable, you can only store on the variable of IEnumerable type, but not on the variable of IQueryable type. That is what we have discussed. Now we need to understand, this is the last piece of what we are going to discuss today. What is the difference between IEnumerable and IQueryable in C#? And basically, it is one of the frequently asked interview questions, and most of the students, they do not know these things. And believe me, guys, because of this, your performance, this will impact your application performance. How? Let us try to understand. The IEnumerable and IQueryable both are used to hold a collection of data, and also used to perform data manipulation operations such as filtering, ordering, grouping, etc. So whether you use as enumerable or as queryable, both are, you can apply some kind of a filter, you can sort the data, you can group the data, you can join the data, whatever you want you can do using both IEnumerable and IQueryable, right? But what is the difference? That is what we need to understand. Okay, for a better understanding or to understand the difference between IEnumerable and IQueryable, look at this image. Okay, so if you look at this image, this is nothing but your IEnumerable and this is nothing but your IQueryable. So this is my .NET application and this is my .NET application. This is my database. Let's assume this is SQL Server database. I'm using IEnumerable. I'm creating one LINQ query, right? In that case, the query is going to be executed on the database. It will fetch the records without applying the filter, and the filter will be applied on the client side. Suppose I'm writing some query, select star from employees, right? Where gender equals to male. Select the top 2 students from the employee where gender equals to male. So in that case, it will retrieve all the data to the client side, and on the client side only it is going to apply the filter. Trying to observe the thing. That means what? So it is going to execute the select statement on the database. Once it retrieve the data to the client application, on the client application it is going to apply the filter. Clear? What is IEnumerable of T? If I'm using IEnumerable interface, then what will happen? If I'm forming the LINQ query using a multiple statement, right? If I'm forming the LINQ query using multiple statement, what is multiple statement? How I can form the LINQ query using multiple statement, that I will show you practically. But for now, if I'm creating a LINQ query using multiple statement means then one base statement which contains the select statement. I'm applying more number of a filter by using different statement. Then what will happen in that case? In that case, the base statement, the select statement will execute on the database and will retrieve all the data to the client application. And on the client application, it is going to apply the filter to filter the data. And once the filtration is done, then that filter data will be handed over to the variable. Coming to IQueryable, even in the case of IQueryable, I have created a multi-statement query. In that case, one statement contains the base query and other statement contain the filtering condition. Then in that case, that query, right, that base statement along with the filtration, everything is going to be executed on the database, and the filtered data will be retrieved, and that filtered data will be handed over to the client application. So difference is that the filtering is applied on the client side, not on the database side. But if I'm using IQueryable, if I'm using that as queryable method on the data source, then in that case, the filtration will be applied on the database, and the filtered data will be retrieved to the client application. But this is if you are interacting with the database only. If you are not interacting with the database in memory means this IQueryable is not required. But if you are working with the database and if you are applying some kind of filter by creating multi-statement query, then in that case, this IQueryable will give you better performance. Why? Because in that case, filter is applied on the database, only few records will be retrieved to the client application. But in this case, filtered will not applied on the database, and filtered data will not return to the client application. On the client application, additional logic will be implemented by the LINQ to filter the data. So now you just tell me, if you are creating a multi-statement query with filter, right? And if you are interacting with the database, then what you need to use? You need to use IEnumerable or you need to use IQueryable. From the performance point of view, both are going to provide the same output, but from the performance point of view, which is going to give you better performance? You just tell me by looking at the image.
IEnumerable, sir.
How IEnumerable will give you the better performance?
Like filtering is happening on the client side.
So see, in that case, from your client application, you are communicating with the database, right? In the database, SQL statement is loaded. If the database return you 10 byte of data, and if the database is returning you 100 byte of data, which will take more time and which will take less time to reach to your client application?
It's actually IQueryable, which will be more performance.
Right? You understand my question? Which will
Yes,
take
sir.
less time to reach from database to your client application?
Less data over the network is less time.
Obviously IQueryable, because we are already filtered the data, and filtered data only retrieving. And in this case, see, one execution is happening in the database. It will take some time. All the data is coming to the client application, means it will retrieving. It means when more data is traveling on the internet. More data means more network bandwidth. More network bandwidth means more time. And again, I'm applying some kind of filter, means again it will going to take some time in the client application also. But in this case, it is applying it, only one query is going to be executed. That means it is taking less time. Filtering the data means less data is traveling over the network, means what? Less time. And in the client side, you do not need to do anything special to filter the data. So definitely IQueryable is going to give you better performance as comparing with IEnumerable when you are interacting with the database. But if you are not interacting with the database, or if you are not interacting with some external application, right? Then simply if you are working with the in-memory object, then IEnumerable is fine. No need to go with the IQueryable, because that as queryable will internally make those additional things will not happening, because that is not required. So the fundamental or the best thing is that if your application is working with some kind of additional external application, and if you are performing the query using multiple statement, then in that case you need to go with IQueryable. But if you are working with the in-memory object, then you need to use with IEnumerable object. But another thing is that if you are if you are creating the LINQ query using a single statement, then it doesn't matter whether you use IEnumerable or you use IQueryable, right? It is matter when you are if you are creating the query by using multiple statements, right? Let us understand this practically. Okay, let me first create a database student DB. Okay, I'm creating a database called student DB. To show you this thing practically, I'm creating a database called student DB. Refresh this, right? Student DB. Let me copy this path. Okay, so what I'm trying to do, let me remove all these things. Let me remove these things. Right, so this is a very simple student class having ID, first name, last name, gender, property, and I have added a few students with both male and female gender. Right now, what I'm trying to do, I'm going to use entity framework. Right, so entity framework database first approach. You just tell me those steps how to communicate with the database using entity framework database first approach. First of all, you need to add edu.net entity data model. So I'm using edu.net entity data model. Right, so I'm providing this model as student DB context. Student DB context. I'm clicking on the add button. I'm going with entity framework database first approach. Click next. Create the connection. Provide the server name. Select the authentication. Select the database. Database is student DB. Text the connection. Connection succeeded. Click on the OK button. And here student DB. I'm providing the connection string as student DB context, right? You can give any name. I'm using entity framework 6.0, and I'm going to include the student table into my application. And here I'm clicking on the finish button. So my entity framework is created. EDMX file is generated, which is going to contain one class, that student model, and we are going to interact with the student DB database, right? So that is fine. It is taking some time because while you are creating the EDMX, it will initially take some time because internally it is going to create the class file. It is going to create the EDMX file, right? If more number of tables means more time it will take to create the EDMX file, right? My EDMX file is generated. You can see this is my class. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to modify the code. Right, I'm just going to copy paste these things. Right, so you can see I'm using the student DB context here, and I'm fetching the students. Right here, you can see this is my query one. This is my one statement. Here I'm applying DB context dot students where gender equals to male. This is one base query, right? And then what I'm applying list of students dot take two. That means the same query, right? List of students I'm forming by using two different statements. So this is one statement and this is another statement. So in this case, I'm selecting top two students where gender equals to male. So first of all, I'm fetching all the students and then I'm applying this list student dot take method, right? That means I'm forming the LINQ query using two different statements. So whatever I'm writing here, whatever the SQL script generated by entity framework, that is what I want to see, and I need to verify what exactly the SQL query. So for that purpose, I'm writing this statement. No need to explain what exactly this statement. db context dot database dot log console dot write. So what it will do now, whatever SQL query generated by this db context class, which is going to be executed on the database, that SQL statement will be logged. Where it will log? It will log in the console dot write, means in our console window, right? And here it's very simple. Here, okay, don't go with the LINQ query. Everything I will explain. I will explain what is this where method, what is this take method, and everything I'm going to explain. But for now, just remember what kind of a SQL query it is. It should generate. It is going to generate select a star from students where gender equals to male, and here select a top 2 star from students where gender equals to male. This is what our requirement, because we need to select top 2 students from the students database table where gender equals to male, and then I'm printing those 2 students. Now and here you can see and I'm not using that IQueryable. That means by default it is going to return me IEnumerable. So in this case, as I'm using IEnumerable, I'm forming the LINQ query using two steps, right? Using two statements. Let me run the application and see whether that top two clause, right, is applied on the SQL query or not. See, so you can see select ID, first name, last name, gender, extent one, male equals to this. The select query, does it contain the top two students? Guys,
No.
No.
so select query doesn't contain the top two students, right? So as the select query doesn't contain the top two students, but if you see the output, I'm getting two students. That means that filtration is happening somewhere or not.
Sir, I think in the top line it is displayed that top two students are already
No.
selected.
No, top two student where gender equals to male means whatever I have written here.
Okay,
That
it's a okay, got it.
okay. If you are getting confused, let me comment this one. Now it's fine. This is my select query, and this is the top two student. You can see the select query contains these things, right? If you take these things and execute in the database, then you will see that it is going to return me only the three students. But out of three, only two is displaying here. Why it is so displaying two? Because we have written this take two method. This take two method is as it's a SQL Server database, then the query should contain like this. The query should contain like this top two, right? If you write like this, I'm getting this. That means this top two is not executed on the database. In the database, this top two is not executed. Means it is retrieving three records into the client application, and on the client application, it is executing some logic internally to filter the data. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. Now, okay, now let me convert this query students dot as queryable, and here I'm using as queryable, right? So I just changed the things, right? Now I'm performing the query using as queryable. I'm not doing anything extra, anything special, just applying this as queryable method and just changing this query to IQueryable. That's it. Now the same the SQL the LINQ query is created using two different statements, right? Now what I'm trying to do, I'm executing the query. So now it is including the top two clause in the select query or not,
Yes.
right? So what is the difference between your IEnumerable and IQueryable means if you are applying some additional filter by using some additional statements, right? Then those filters are not going to be applied if you are using IEnumerable, right? Not applied in the sense those filter will not be executed on the database. But if you are using IQueryable, then those additional filters which are formed using additional LINQ statement, right? Then even though they are created additionally, they are also going to be executed on the database as part of the select statement. Clear, guys? The difference between enumerable and queryable,
Yes.
right? But one more thing I need to tell. But what will happen if it is created using a single statement? As I mentioned, if you are creating it using a single statement, then there is no issue, right? I'm using take two and I'm commenting this one. Even though in this case, it is also going to form that select top two. Even if you are using IEnumerable, then also it is going to give you the same output, right? Now I'm removing this, and instead of IQueryable, I'm using IEnumerable, right? So run the application. So even though if it is formed using a single query means it is going to be like this. So the point that you need to remember, if you are applying more filter by additional LINQ queries, right? Then if you want that filter to be applicable at the database, then you need to use I as in queryable. Clear, guys? Or any question?
Sir, I have one doubt. Like, what is meant by client side, sir?
See, in this case, this database is the server, right? And this application is nothing but your application. So you are executing this application, means it is the client, and this is the database where the data actually stored. This is nothing but your server. Right now, in the server, you are storing the data. And those data you want in your .NET application. This .NET application, whatever I'm showing here, it is nothing but your client application. Don't be confused. This .NET application is nothing but your client application. And this database is nothing but your server. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any
Thank
question from anyone? And how to form the as queryable? Simply you need to write as queryable method, and here you need to change this to IQueryable. That's it. And then whatever filter you applied, right, whether in this statement or in the upcoming statement, right, every filter is going to be executed on the database. And if you are applying all the filter on the database, definitely it is going to improve the application performance, right?
So one doubt actually. So on the object retrieved, like you're calling that take method.
Yes.
So in the previous example, like IEnumerable, the object were returned, and okay, you were calling the same thing on list students also, but here the format is little different. No, I think both
No,
are
sir,
same thing.
in this case, this is the variable and I'm applying this take method. So in this case, I'm directly applying the take method here. So whatever this query I have written, that is stored here, and then I'm applying the take method. But now directly I'm applying the take method. So if you know what is a method syntax means you need to apply multiple method by using the dot operator only. Right, this is nothing but your methods, and so there is no difference. So you can prepare the query like this, or you can prepare the query like this. In our coming session, I will discuss this thing in more detail, right? But for now, this is just an introduction. So in this case, in this example, don't go with the queries, right? Whatever method I'm writing, take, where, right, as query, don't go with this one. Or you need to understand what is the main difference between IQueryable and IEnumerable. Definitely, I'm going to explain this where method, this take method, right? How this method is work, right? How this take method is work. Everything I'm going to discuss separately in the respective session. But for now, just remember the difference between IQueryable and IEnumerable. So you can form the LINQ query using a single statement. You can form the LINQ query using multiple statement also. Right? If you are forming the LINQ query using multiple statement, this additional filter, right, will be applicable, will be executed on the database if you are using this as queryable. If you are not using this as queryable, this additional filter, right? Additional filter means the filter which is applied in a different statement. Those are going to be executed on the database. Okay, so now we need to understand some of the difference. IEnumerable is an interface that is available in system.collection namespace, or if you are using IEnumerable of T, then that is going to be available in system.collections.generic namespace. While querying the data from the database, IEnumerable execute the select statement on the server side, that is on the database, loads the data into memory on the client side. Whenever I'm saying into client side means into your .NET application, and then only apply the filters on the retrieved data if we split the query into multiple statements, right? If we form the query using a single statement, then everything is going to be executed in the database, right? We need to use IEnumerable when you need to query the data from in-memory collections like list, array, so on, right? If you are having a collection of list, array, then you need to use IEnumerable. IEnumerable is mostly used in the LINQ to object and LINQ to XML queries, right? If you are working with the object in the sense this list, array, or XML document, then IEnumerable is mostly used. IEnumerable doesn't support lazy loading. What is lazy loading? We'll discuss in our coming sessions. What is IQueryable? It is also an interface which exists in system.linq namespace. While querying the data from a database, the IQueryable execute the select query with the applied filter on the server side only. Then retrieves the data even though if the query is created using multiple statements. We need to use IQueryable when we want to query the data from out memory. Out memory means in memory means whatever object you created inside your application. Out memory means from the remote database, some API you are calling, right? From outside your .NET application, if you are retrieving the data, then you need to use IQueryable. IQueryable is mostly used in LINQ to SQL and the LINQ to entities. So in this case, you can see I'm using LINQ to entities. DB context class means LINQ to entities. IQueryable supports lazy loading. Again, what is lazy loading? What is eager loading? Everything I will discuss how you can implement paging, right? Those things we are going to discuss in our coming session. So lazy loading means what I can say on demand, right? On demand means there are two types of things. Eager loading, from the starting, load the data. Lazy loading means whenever required the data, just load the data. That is the difference between. So it's you can compare these two things like the static and non-static. Static variable means once the class start execution, then the static variables are created in the memory. And what is non-static? Non-static means whenever we create the object, then only the memory allocation will be done for the variable. Similarly, eager loading means from the beginning only load the data. Lazy loading means whenever the data required, then only load the data. If data is not required, then don't load the data, right? And how we can implement this, that we will discuss once we start discussing the lazy loading and the eager loading. So this is the introduction class of entity framework, introduction class of LINQ. Anybody having any question, they can ask me now.
No.
Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
So please, one more suggestion, please ping on the Telegram group whether you guys want the solid principle class on Saturday or Sunday, and accordingly I will plan, right? So more number of students, if interested for Saturday, then I will take the class on Saturday. If more number of students are interested for Sunday, then I will take the class on Sunday. If tie, then it will depend on me. Thank you guys.
Thank you.